Penguins 4, Bruins 1. It's Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Hi, I'm Matt Gajtka. It's been a week since we last chatted after a Pens game, and Pittsburgh bounces back to get the split in the home-and-home series, an extended home-and-home series, but a home-and-home series nonetheless, against their black and gold rivals, if you will. Pens were in white at home, looking a little bit different, looking like a throwback to some earlier eras of Pens Bruins, most notably in my mind, the 1991 Conference Final, Wales Conference Final, the big breakthrough for the Pens. Not quite as important here tonight, but the Penguins did jump back ahead of the Capitals. They were flat-footed coming into tonight for that third spot in the Metro. So now the Penguins hold the third spot in the Metro Division by themselves by 2 over the Caps, but the Caps still have a game in hand on Pittsburgh. So still pretty likely that's going to go all the way down to the end, as the Penguins now have 4 games left in the regular season. Jake Guentzel gets the hat trick, caps it off with an empty netter. The Penguins league-leading 22nd of the season, believe it or not. And Guentzel now with 40 on the year for the second time as an NHLer. And he's just a handful of Penguins, one of a handful of Penguins to have done that, multiple 40-goal years in his career. And still a long way to go for Jake, hopefully, in a Penguins sweater. But maybe I'm burying the lead. Casey DeSmith, just a few days after finding out he might be the Penguins' Game 1 playoff starter, might be the playoff starter for a while if the Penguins do go deep into the postseason due to the injury to Tristan Jarry. Well, he gave up a couple of quick goals to Boston in that Saturday game up at TD Garden, but tonight, airtight, 52 stops, setting a Penguins record for a goaltender in a shutout. Jean-Sébastien Aubin, as Bob Airy just said on the broadcast there on AT&T Sportsnet, had the previous record. Seabass stopped 45 one night during his somewhat brief tenure with the Penguins, but I think we all remember him as the backup to Tom Barrasso for a while. Then he had the job for a little bit before it was handed off to Johan Hedberg, Sebastian Caron, and then eventually Marc-Andre Fleury. So there's a little history lesson for you. Didn't know that about Jean-Sébastien Aubin, who last I checked still lives in Pittsburgh and is a golf pro up in the Cranberry area, and occasionally drops in on Penguins practice and checks out the action at the UPMC Lemieux Sports Center. The Pens saw a lot of the Lemieux Sports Center this week as they got back to practice. Maybe that was a benefit. I know it's been a busy schedule game-wise, so not a lot of time to go over details, and you can only watch so much video. You've got to go out there and run through it sometimes to maybe correct some flaws in your game. But I don't want to overstate the Penguins' play in this game as well, even though it was a 4-0 win. The Penguins, well, I mentioned they gave up 52 shots. None of them went in for Boston. And, Casey DeSmith was, I would say, solid or workmanlike. It wasn't a spectacular effort, but still you don't want to give up that many shots on net. Just by luck, one of them is bound to go in, you would imagine, but not tonight. Scoring chances were pretty even through 2 periods. If you go by natural stat tricks accounting, it was 15 apiece, in fact. High danger was 7-3 even in favor of the Penguins going into the third period before the Bruins controlled the, I guess you would call it, the ice that's contested in front of the net in the third as they were trying to come back, and the Bruins ended up on top in scoring chances and expected goals, but you also have to factor in the fact that they're down 3-0 going into the third period. So any team worth their salt is going to have a significant pushback in that situation, and the Bruins did. The Bruins also had a couple of power plays in the third period. They're only ones of the game, and those went by the boards. Did not work out for Boston, as you saw. So the Bruins stay behind the Lightning, who are winning right now. The Bruins trying to jump out of that wild card position and push for a spot in the top 3 in the Atlantic. The Atlantic, a little bit of a higher standard, though, right now. The Bruins came into tonight with 99 points, and, they end the night with 99 points, and it looks like the Lightning are going to have 102 as they're up 4-0 right now in their game. We'll get to that out-of-town scoreboard in just a little bit, but I want to remind you this is interactive hockey talk, so you see that live chat on the side of the screen. You also can tweet at me, at Matt Gajtka. There it is. I think it's in that corner, the graphic, if I can point the right direction. So let's go to that out-of-town scoreboard. In fact, for right now, I'll give you an update. Carolina comes back to beat Winnipeg. So the Hurricanes, which came into the night tied with the Rangers for first in the Metro, they keep up their pace. They've actually fallen off a little bit, the Hurricanes have, letting the Rangers back into this thing. And the Rangers are beating the Islanders by 3 with 4 minutes to go in the third period. So it looks like the Rangers and the Hurricanes are going to be remaining tied going into the final couple of weeks of the regular season. Tampa Bay is beating Toronto, by the way, so Tampa Bay a chance to jump up in the standings. And let's see, anything else from the Eastern Conference? Nothing involving two playoff teams. We did see Florida beat Detroit 5-2. They came back in that game as well. And then Philadelphia beat Montreal. The Pens will be seeing Philadelphia pretty soon here. But it's been a really rough season for the Flyers, and I know none of you out there are crying about that. So the standings as they stand right now, Hurricanes and Rangers about to be tied at 108. Penguins now with 99 points with 4 games to go. Capitals with 97 with 5 games to play. And the Penguins have, I think, 2 at home, 2 on the road. I'll have to check that in just a moment. Panthers up by 10 in the Atlantic. They're probably going to win the Eastern Conference and play the wild card team with the fewest points. Maple Leafs at 108. Tampa Bay at 100. Well, it's going to take quite the push from Tampa Bay to catch the Maple Leafs. So it looks like 1-2 are solidified, even despite the Lightning's apparent win tonight. And then you've got the Bruins at 99 points. So the Bruins could easily still jump up above Tampa Bay, even with Boston's loss tonight. Schedule for the Penguins coming up with 4 left to play. I know it's not entirely important where they finish in the standings, but I know some of you are interested in that, and I almost feel like I'd rather see them drop down to the wild card and play Florida just because of the Panthers' relative postseason inexperience. So the Pens have Detroit on Saturday, then at Philadelphia on Sunday. The game Saturday, available outside of Pittsburgh on NHL Network, and then national broadcast, TNT broadcast on Sunday. And then Edmonton and Columbus next Tuesday and Friday, respectively, to wrap up the regular season. That Edmonton game is a nationally televised game as well on ESPN. Crosby versus McDavid for the 7th or the 8th or the 9th time. Not sure what it is. Christian Kosmak says hello. Hello, Christian. Thank you for your comment. When will we finally realize that Marcus Pettersson is more of a liability than an asset? I think the Penguins have realized that, at least in some stretches of the imagination, because he's been scratched a few times here in favor of Mark Friedman. Friedman not out there tonight, though. It was Ruedel and Pettersson and Letang as your right side defenseman. So, and the Penguins have gone back to their old pairings as well. That Marino and Dumoulin pairing just was not getting it done. They were getting bombed. So it's back to Letang and Dumoulin, back to Marino and Matheson, and Pettersson and Ruedel. So, yeah, Marcus Pettersson, Pettersson, a left side defenseman, I should say. I don't know what I was thinking there. Ruedel's a right-handed shot. But, yeah, Pettersson, he looks the part, right? When you see him, at least if this were a draft combine, he'd have a projectable body, you would say, projectable frame, long frame, but gets beat quite consistently in places where you don't want him to get beat. I'm not sure he's necessarily that tough in the corners or in front of the net. Doesn't have to be if he was better moving the puck, but he just isn't really strong in any particular area. Like if you're Mike Matheson, who has a good stick in his defensive zone, but he's not a guy that's going to intimidate you by any means, and he's not a lockdown defender by any means either, maybe because he's up ice a lot of times, but that's what you want from a guy who is elite at the offensive end, or at least getting there in the case of Matheson. Same deal with Chris Letang. You can forgive some sins, not all of them, but you can forgive some because of what he does. Look at his setup today on Guentzel's second goal. It was beautiful. So Letang does things that most defensemen can't do. Same deal with Mike Matheson, but Pettersson, he's got to be better in his own end, or else I think we're going to see him on the shelf more down the stretch, and I think in the playoffs too. So, Christian, I don't think that Mike Sullivan is ignorant of what you say. I don't think he thinks he's necessarily a huge liability, but he just doesn't bring a lot to the table, does Marcus. So, if I had to make a wager on who's going to be in the lineup, him or Friedman to start the playoffs, I think I might go with Friedman, although it depends on the competition. Team like the Panthers, maybe you feel like that Friedman can maybe get in some people's grills and intimidate in that way, perhaps get some players off their game. Against a more savvy veteran team, I don't know if that's necessarily the approach. And Friedman has shown, well, some volatility out there. He's not a perfect player by any means, or he wouldn't have been claimed off waivers last year by the Pens. So it's a good question about where Pittsburgh might go. I want to talk about some articles that were interesting I read this week on some national outlets. One about a potential expanded NHL postseason that's not imminent, mind you, but it was good food for thought. Also, thoughts on goals being up across the board. We had 2 stories, in fact, over this past week. The NHL is about to finish the season with its highest goals averaged per game since 1996. So we're talking 25, 26 years since we've seen these many goals go in on an average basis in an NHL game. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. I do want to get to Jeff Carter. He's had a rough few weeks here. When you're talking about tilting the ice, he's not been doing it. He's been tilting it the other way. It's been rolling back toward the Penguins, in fact, when Jeff Carter's out there. And he's miscast right now with Malkin suspended, so let's keep that in mind. But today he did show a little bit of why he's out there with that deft touch on the sequence that led to Jason Zucker's goal. It made it 2-0, a very important goal because Boston was apparently on the verge of tying the game until DeSmith came up with a few sparkling saves. And then, out of nowhere, bolt right out of the blue, the Penguins score in transition on the counterattack. And it's Jeff Carter with just the slightest of touches on a cross-ring pass, throwing off the Boston defense. I think Charlie Coyle was the man who was trying to mark Carter, got a little too close to him, and the puck slipped right by him when Carter deflected it instead of receiving that pass in a more traditional sense. And that sent Zucker down the backside wide open, and he buried the shot top shelf over Jeremy Swayman. And I don't want to say that's all she wrote, but the Bruins had to have been deflated because they were outplaying the Penguins to that point about halfway through the second period when that goal went in. And the Penguins regained control after that Zucker goal and actually took it to the Bruins in the final 7 or 8 minutes before the second intermission. And by that point, it was 3-0. And this horse was essentially out of the barn. And I do want to update you. There was some updating of the stats here. High danger scoring chances for the Penguins, 8 and 9 for the Bruins on naturalstattrick.com. So wasn't as lopsided as the shot counter might indicate, but to a certain point, volume is to be respected and to be paid attention to when you give up 52 shots on goal. The Bruins in total, well, that's actually just 5-on-5 I'm looking at here. All situations, the Penguins had 11 high danger scoring chances and the Bruins had 12. The Bruins, 78 shot attempts, 52 on goal, so really good percentage there. And the Penguins with 55 shot attempts all told, 32 of those on net. It's not a bad offensive night for the Penguins by any means. They scored 3 goals against the goaltender plus the empty netter. And the Bruins are typically a fairly stingy outfit. They have been under Bruce Cassidy. They definitely were under Claude Julien prior to that. And I know they were missing David Pastrnak, but that doesn't affect their defending that much. They still had Bergeron out there. They still had Marchand out there. They still had almost the full complement. But it wasn't quite a full-strength matchup tonight because of Pastrnak out on the Boston side with injury and Malkin serving the final game of his suspension for cross-checking Mark Borowiecki of Nashville a couple of weeks back. So it'll be good to see Malkin back. It's time to get him back in there, get him 4 games, hopefully, before the end of the regular season. And then we can go from there. A reminder, you can like and subscribe here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Let me get the channel name right. PSL, we'll go with that. And you can receive notifications as to when we go live with these post-game shows. Going to be rolling with these throughout the rest of the regular season and on into the playoffs. My name is Matt Gajtka. If you don't know me, I'm a former Penguins beat reporter. Used to write for DK Pittsburgh Sports in 2016, 17, and 18. Some good years to be covering the team. Very interesting years. And still a few players left from those days, but a lot of turnover, as you often see in a cap league like the NHL. Christian has another comment. Thanks again, Christian. He says, this season feels like deja vu. I have a bad feeling about an early postseason matchup with the Rangers. Do you think someone like Friedman would help the Penguins in that situation, or does he get too involved in nonsense? No, I think Friedman would maybe help turn the temperature up in some situations. I think the Rangers have had a little too easy against the Penguins in these late season matchups. 3 in a row that they took care of the Pens. 2 of those weren't terribly close. The one that really disturbed me was the one up at the Garden, March, I think, 27th or 28th, somewhere in that range, where the Pens had a chance to make a statement to make the season series 2-0 in favor of them, and the Rangers just blew them out. That wasn't a contest, and that was probably the worst game of the season for the Penguins. Not saying that would be the case in the playoffs because, well, both teams would be amped up. But I wouldn't mind seeing Friedman in a situation like that. Number one, I don't think the Rangers pose that big of a threat in terms of going to the net front. So Friedman's a little bit undersized. Yeah, he's feisty, but doesn't have a long reach. I'm not sure that would be his strength. I think his strength might be more of a skating game. And so if it's a skating game that you seek, the Rangers are probably going to provide it to you. They're a big-time counterattacking team, as we've seen over and over again. So it's hard to say, really, with one player as it pertains to that kind of a matchup in the playoffs. I still think that wouldn't be a terrible matchup for the Penguins, despite how they looked against the Rangers here late in the season. I just think the Rangers are a little inexperienced, and they've been playing a little bit better lately since the trade deadline, but they were leaning on their goaltender, Shesterkin, for a long time, and now Shesterkin's come a little bit back down to earth, not terribly, but he's at about a .915 instead of a .940 since the start of February or so. So he's looking at least human, and I just like the Penguins' experience in that situation, even though a lot of these Penguins players haven't experienced a postseason series victory. Now that I look back on it, it's Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Jake Guentzel, and I guess Brian Rust, too. So 5 players that you could point to. Well, 6, sorry. Brian Dumoulin. It's more than I thought. So it's not like it's a total exodus since 2018 when they beat the Flyers in the first round, then lost to the Caps, who went on to win the Stanley Cup. So it has been 4 years, or it will be 4 years very shortly since they won a postseason series, but you still have that core, and I think that means something. Whether it be Jake Guentzel's savvy in front of the net or in the scoring areas, or obviously Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, their ability still in their mid-30s to deliver a little shock and awe to the opposition. We are live right now with Pittsburgh Sports Live. Thank you for joining me. Want to make sure I get a retweet here and broadcast that out on Twitter right now. So what did you think about the game? I thought it was a nice litmus test for the Pens, especially coming off that loss, which was pretty close. 2-1 loss to the Bruins. Literally, it was close, but also in terms of game flow. The Penguins looked, I think, good against the Bruins outside of the opening few minutes. And even though it didn't inspire anybody to see Casey DeSmith allow a couple of goals very early, I'm not sure that he was one to pin that loss on. And in fact, I think he's played really well outside of the opening, 3 minutes in Boston since he found out that he's going to be the starter for now. And judging from some reporting that some folks did at the arena, I want to give credit to Dave Molinari, I think Taylor Haas as well. They were in the house to see the team picture. Shelley Anderson of Pittsburgh Hockey Now. I don't want to forget her, obviously, part of the Pittsburgh Sports Now family. But team picture day, Tristan Jarry, the Penguins' #1 goalie, at least until last week, was wheeled out onto the ice on a chair. So not a good look for someone who I would imagine had some thoughts of coming back for the start of the playoffs, or at least at some point in that first round if the Penguins were to extend it out a little bit. But if he's in a cast with 2 weeks to go, I think it is actually it's less than 2 weeks now. So really hard to see Tristan Jarry getting back out there. And it was reported by Colin Dunlap of 93.7 The Fan that it is a broken bone for Tristan Jarry, somewhere in the foot. Could be a toe, could be more midfoot, who knows. But a broken bone, not easy to heal, but I almost would prefer that over something that would be a little more exposed, I guess, because goaltenders' skates are like bulletproof body armor, honestly. So I don't think it was broken in any kind of ballistic situation, I guess you could put it. He wasn't broken by a shot. It looked like Anders Lee of the Islanders fell over onto him, and might have put some twisting pressure on that. So obviously impossible for me to predict from the outside, not knowing the information. Sometimes broken bones can be better than strains or certainly muscle tears, but in the foot, such an intricate and critical spot for a goaltender. Always has to shift his weight subtly to move around the crease, sometimes not so subtly to make the big push across. So I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I do feel much better about Casey DeSmith, who, just reading some quotes here from the postgame press conference, telling the assembled reporters that quote, a 52-save shutout always builds the confidence a little bit. Coming into this game, I felt prepared. I'm just happy to help the team get the win. Yeah, I think it would build some confidence, certainly. You think so, Doctor? Yes. DeSmith, typically pretty understated, like most goalies in the NHL. But it has to be at least a little bit easier for him than if he were just thrown into it at the start of the playoffs, like Jeff Zatkoff was at the start of the 2016 postseason. Mr. Game 1 helped the Pens get the win at home against the Rangers, then lost in Game 2 before Matt Murray came back into the net, and we all know how that story ended up. It was a very happy ending that spring and into the summer for the Penguins. But for Casey, maybe just knowing that you're going to start several games here. I don't know if Louis Domingue will see one this weekend. Probably, I would imagine, in case the Penguins need him. They want to throw him out there and get him some game action too. But it's going to be DeSmith's cage, so that might make things mentally more well, more routine to deal with. You can develop a routine if you're Casey DeSmith, as opposed to before when you're just going when you're called upon. And that's difficult for a lot of players. And DeSmith is still a young-ish goalie, so it's not like he's settled in as a number two, a backup at the NHL level. You can get into a rhythm with that and find some things. But DeSmith last year was essentially a 1B to Tristan Jarry. So this is his first full year as a full-time backup at the NHL level. He didn't even start consecutive games until last weekend. So he's still figuring this backup thing out, but now he's not a backup anymore. Hunter Hodes, hey, he's got his own show. Check that out, Locked On Penguins, LO_Penguins. He says, what's up, buddy? Thought the 52 shots were but expected goals and high danger chances were pretty close. Yeah, I was just going over that, Hunter, actually. Must have been just before you tuned in on Natural Stat Trick. By their accounting, it was almost a dead heat, even with Boston pushing hard in the third period and early in the second period, honestly, as they were just down 1-0 early in the second and could have easily tied it up, but DeSmith was quite excellent in those spots. He made a couple big saves. Zucker scored, and that's hockey for you. I often say, and it's often said in hockey and actually soccer, I think, specializes in this phrase, but goals change games. And it may sound obvious. Well, yeah, it changes the scoreboard first and foremost. But in terms of momentum and in emotions in a game, it can deflate or it can inflate. And in the case of the Bruins, when they're controlling play and then they give up a goal on the counter to Jason Zucker. By the way, nice to see him score, isn't it? Good to see him back healthy and on the ice and looking spry, looking good. And, the Pens are going to need that secondary and tertiary scoring depth in the playoffs if they want to make a run. But at that point, the Penguins score and make it 2-0. I don't want to say you can shut it down, but it's pretty close. The Bruins are, yes, playing for playoff positioning, but they're in the playoffs too. So you're not seeing the highest level of desperation from either team in this spot. There's still another level to get to, maybe even two more levels to get to. There's the highest of stakes for the regular season, then there's another level for the postseason, as we all know. But I think a pretty strong effort from the Penguins. The 52 shots, you don't want to see the number ever even get above 40 if you can help it in terms of shots on goal. But shot attempts were not mind-boggling. It was 78 total, all situations for the Bruins. But 38 in that third period for the Bruins, too. So score effects being what they are, that's still quite a bit. But we all know this Penguins team isn't exactly a lockdown defensive team. And who is in the NHL these days? A lot of younger players out there, not a lot of practice going on. That brings me to what I wanted to talk about, too. I read an interesting article, or a pair of articles, one from Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. That was an insider article, so that's paywalled if you don't have that, or ESPN Plus. And, well, speaking of paywall, The Athletic, Michael Russo wrote a wide-ranging piece. Both of them tackling the increased goal scoring in the NHL. And I think we're looking at, 3.4 or 5 goals per team per game this year, which would be the highest average in the NHL since 1995-96. That was a good year for the Penguins, in fact, until the conference final, but we'll just leave that behind. Let me just confirm that number. No, this season is 3.09. Okay, so it's not quite as high as I thought, but going back to 95-96, it was 3.14, so the NHL pretty close to that number here. Yes, there are more empty netters scored because coaches are more liberal about pulling their goalies. We just saw it tonight. Bruce Cassidy had Swayman off with 4 minutes to go, then back off the ice with 3 minutes to go, down 3. So in the past, maybe a team just says, screw it, it's 3-0, we're not going to win. But teams aren't giving up as much as they used to, and they're realizing that what's the difference if we lose 3-0 or 4-0? So coaches and teams are smartening up, but you can't cover that huge jump from year to year that we're seeing here with just empty net goals and extra attacker goals as well. So first of all, I think it's encouraging to see offense be play more of a role. But let's not get too carried away. We're not talking about lacrosse scores here. I saw a comment on The Athletic lamenting the fact that we're headed toward 8-7 final scores every night. I would actually love that, but I know what they mean. If every game is high scoring, then it's not as exciting. Variety should still be a part of it. I think variety is definitely still a part of it. But the game is tilting toward offense. You're seeing faster players. We've seen that for 15 years now. I think officiating has played a small role in it. It's not quite as pronounced as some might have you believe. I still don't feel like enough penalties are called. In fact, I know enough penalties aren't called since we're at the lowest rate of power plays per team per game in 50-plus years, and it's been going down precipitously for a while. So this is almost all at even strength that we're talking about, this offensive surge in the NHL. But guys are just more skilled coming into the league, and they're more willing to try things. I think a salary cap league helps get younger players more playing time because they're cheaper, right? So it all adds up to it. Maybe plays a little sloppier, but, I mean, honestly, a perfectly played hockey game is not always the most exciting hockey game. It's not like some other sports, not like baseball, where a really tightly played game can be absolutely exciting, and it can be in the NHL and in hockey in general, but hockey is at its best when it's a little chaotic, or in some cases a lot chaotic. Not over the top, but when people are making mistakes, when teams aren't structurally perfect, then that's when offense arises. That's when creativity can shine, is in those gaps and in those little mistakes that are made out there. Sometimes that you or I can't even spot with the naked eye or even upon further review. That's why we have guys like Jay Caulfield, right, to look at things. And Jesse Marshall, speaking of The Athletic, I want to give him a shout. He's been a guest on this show in the past. So Christian Kosmak talks about some high-scoring teams, Pittsburgh and Colorado, the most interesting potential Cup storyline that nobody talks about. Yeah, Sid versus Nate, the two Cole Harbor boys, that would be terrific. I think that would be a lot of fun. And I love that home-and-home series against Colorado earlier this month, or pardon me, was that maybe late last month? Either way, it wasn't too long ago. And I thought that was some of the most entertaining hockey I've seen all year. And he says, Christian wraps up his comment with Sixburg on ice. And the Pens, I think, can make a run here. But as Hunter Hodes himself, a viewer tonight, tweeted during the game, if this version of Casey DeSmith shows up, no odious goals, no softies, and maybe just one in a series you can get away with, potentially two. Heck, the Islanders got away with a couple of stinkers last year with Semyon Varlamov between the pipes, not Ilya Sorokin. But I digress. But it is possible. You don't have to have a perfect goaltending performance or perfectly solid to win a series. DeSmith showed that he has potential, and it's not out of the realm. We've seen him get hot before, and maybe he just needs to get hot for a couple of weeks, and then it's back to Tristan Jarry. But who knows? Then we're getting ahead of ourselves because, as we all know, this team has not won a postseason series since 2018 and hasn't won two postseason series since 2017. When they went all away. But yes, Christian, I think Pittsburgh, Colorado will be a good example of the quote-unquote new NHL or whatever version of the NHL this is, NHL 5.0, 6.0, 7.0, whatever you want to call it, that emphasizes speed, counterattacking, emphasizes offensive skill. Nathan MacKinnon, there might not be a more fun player to watch in the league. He's just a complete terror. A physical specimen who's also developed his finesse game to a degree that he can hurt you in a lot of ways. And I do love Colorado to come out of the West. I think the East is more of a muddle. You have more teams that can seriously contend, in my opinion, in the East. And a while back I said I could see 7 out of 8 teams come out of the Eastern Conference. That was before the Penguins slump. Maybe they've dropped off that radar for you. Not quite for me. I still think there's some time here for them to build on something like what we saw tonight. And this Bruins series, the Islanders series, pretty good results without Malkin in the lineup. So, but make no mistake, they need Malkin back out there. I think through 2 periods, that Carter line with Zucker and Rust, despite the goal being scored when they were on the ice, but despite generating that goal, they were being outshot 14-3. So that's not going to get the job done for a second line, especially. That's fourth line numbers. That's actually, you don't want any line to be putting up those numbers against a good team like the Bruins or against anybody else. So, you know my take on offense there. I just laid it out there for you, and that's why I love the idea of maybe a Colorado-Pittsburgh matchup. But the Penguins have to get it going here. We'll talk about first round matchups, talk about offense. It could be those Florida Panthers that the Penguins face if they end up in the 4th spot in the Metro, and thus a wild card berth would be theirs, and thus they play could be the President's Cup winning Florida Panthers. Wouldn't that be ironic? Because I mentioned that 1995-96 season and the fact that the Penguins, who averaged nearly 4.5 goals per game that season, were shut down by a variety of clutch and grab tactics foisted upon them from the Florida Panthers, who were then just in their 2nd season, and the Panthers were then crushed by the Avalanche in the Stanley Cup Final. Hey, that could have been a Penguins-Avalanche Stanley Cup Final. So we're seeing some parallels here aren't we, Christian, and the rest of you who are out there watching? But the Panthers, turnabout, they're the team leading the league in scoring this year, 4.17. That's the highest by a team since those Penguins of 1995-96. Penguins-Panthers in the first round, we could see a lot of 6-5 games. We could see some of those 8-7 games maybe that one commenter on The Athletic was worried about. The NHL has a lot bigger things to worry about than that. How about this? One more thing before I go here on Pittsburgh Postgame. Another article that was out today from, again, Greg Wyshynski on ESPN.com, talking about there are some in the game, some general managers, some NHL team governors, some owners who would like to see the league expand its playoffs. And this comes in the wake of another, I would say, successful NBA play-in tournament. The NBA, in case you haven't noticed, a lot of hockey fans don't, but I like to pay attention to all the leagues going on. I like to at least give cursory note of it. I like the idea in the NBA of what they've done. They've made the battle for the final 2 seeds in their respective conferences, the 7 and the 8 seeds, up for grabs among 4 teams between the 7, 8, 9, and 10. And what they do is they give the 7 and the 8 seeds an opportunity to win their way in. 7 plays 8 first in the play-in tournament. Whoever wins that gets into the postseason field, so they're set. And then the loser of that game plays the winner of the 9 versus 10 game. These are all single elimination, by the way. So you can get it done in, 4 days or so. And then the loser of the 7-8 game plays the winner of the 9-10 game, as I was saying, for that 8 spot. So I like the idea that it produces tiers in the playoff field, and that would thus perhaps give a team like the Florida Panthers a chance to play like the Columbus Blue Jackets in the first round, or the Detroit Red Wings, who may have just gotten hot but may not be terribly deserving and may just be cannon fodder for them. On the other hand, I also worry that a 10 seed in the NHL, because hockey is more random than the other sports, certainly more random than basketball, I worry that a team like the Blue Jackets, or heaven forbid the Red Wings, or someone out west like the Canucks, would sneak in and then upset the 1 seed and then go on some run, and then we'd have to try to figure out why this is happening outside of maybe good luck and good goaltending and great finishing, like we saw from the Montreal Canadiens last year. I don't think we ever want to see that again, where a team just a flash in the pan and then goes away. I'm not sure that's good for business in the league. Even if it is a prestige team like Montreal, it just makes the league look too fluky in my mind when you have a situation like Montreal going from the Cup final, for heaven's sake, to last place in the league and looking absolutely terrible this season. So too much randomness is not good, but I also, there's part of me just wants to see the entertainment factor there. And I also don't feel any sympathy for the 7 or the 8 seeds. You just weren't good enough. So if you don't want to play in the play-in tournament, then just play better and finish in the top 6. That would add more drama to the regular season. Can you imagine right now? So the Penguins and the Capitals would be battling for the right to get into the playoffs proper, and the team that finished in 4th in the Metro, at least under the current format, would then have to play, say, Boston in that first part of the play-in tournament, and then if they lost that, they get a second chance. But suddenly your season's on the line, and even if it's double elimination for you as a 7 or an 8 seed, that does give you more motivation, doesn't it, to win at this time of the year if you're clearly already in the top 8 like we were seeing in the East. Maybe it's just because the East has been so cut and dried. Even the West, honestly. It's been 9 teams for 8 spots for a while here since Vancouver couldn't keep up that second-half pace under Bruce Boudreau. So I'd be open to something like that. And as is typical, the NBA more innovative than the NHL. It seems like, according to Greg Wyshynski, that it's not necessarily the Board of Governors or the GMs who are opposed to this sort of thing, but it's more Gary Bettman, who is married to tradition and wanting to keep things the same way, a clean 16 teams. Although COVID did twist his arm. You know what? It did, going back to 2020 when you had the play-in tournament. So it's not like it's totally foreign to the NHL recently. And also, as Wyshynski made the point in his article, the World Cup of Hockey is coming up. The NHL doesn't want to stop play for the Olympics, but with the World Cup of Hockey presumably restarting in 2024, the NHL is going to shut down for a couple of weeks for that. Excuse me. So if you can show a way that it gets more revenue into the coffers of the owners and the league, and I guess by proxy the players too, or indirectly the players too, then maybe there's a lot of motivation to do something like that. Anyway, good food for thought on that topic. I could see the downsides to it, but I also like the idea of giving some motivation to teams that are already locked into the playoff spots to keep moving up and win the President's Trophy, win the conference in the regular season, because then you might get a real bottom feeder team or pretty close to it in the first round. And hockey can be rather random. Hockey can be tough to predict, but I know a 1 versus 10 over the long haul would give the 1 seed a better chance of advancing than a 1 versus 8. That's just how it goes. And so maybe that makes it more fair, at least in that case. I don't know, just spitballing here. All right, that's about it for Pittsburgh Postgame. Thank you for watching again. I'm going to try to have a show this weekend. Like I said, we have back-to-back games for the Pens. Detroit, 12:30 on Saturday, maybe after the Flyers game. They play 4 o'clock on TNT on Sunday. So we can catch up after that, perhaps. If not, then I'll see you next Tuesday, definitely, after the big showdown between Crosby and McDavid and Malkin and Draisaitl. Pens and Oilers from PPG Paints Arena. I'm already excited about that one. Dare we dream about a cup final between those two teams, huh? It's funny what a difference a couple weeks makes. We were talking about the Penguins getting flushed out of the playoffs, and a lot of you may think that they'll be early round fodder for some highly seeded team, but hey, dare we to dream? Why not while the stars are still shining here in Pittsburgh? The Stars tonight, Jake Guentzel, 40 goals once again. Boy, has he ever been hot. He's gotten hot at the right time, it seems like. Hat trick tonight, his 5th of his Penguins career, and Casey DeSmith. Casey at the bat in this baseball season, and he's going to be at the bat for a while, it appears. 52 saves, Penguins record in a shutout. One last comment here. We got Mike Osti watching, the major domo of Pittsburgh Sports Live. He says, I'm all for a play-in with 7 and 8 seeds, but the NBA doing it with the 9 and 10 included waters it down too much. Teams 10 games under got an NBA play-in. Yeah, I know. It's in the NBA, you can also say, well, these teams are just going to lose in the first round because they most likely are. That's just the way basketball works. There's more of a gap between the haves and the have-nots, even within the playoff field. But if you have a play-in with 7 and 8 seeds, then you got to include at least the 9, don't you? Maybe it's an 8 versus 9, just one game playoff. That would be okay, too, for me. That would also increase motivation to not finish in the 8 spot in each conference. So another possibility there for you. If you don't want to do the full play-in tournament, just do 8 versus 9. I think ESPN's John Butchergross, fellow Ohio Valley native, by the way, he mentioned that possibility like 10 years ago, and I liked it then, and I do like it now. So that would actually also prevent the idea that you might have these top-seeded teams develop some rust when they're sitting out watching the play-in tournament. So maybe that's the best of both worlds, kind of a baseball-style wild card game, although baseball itself is going away from that. But 8 versus 9, I would have no sympathy for either team that would lose that, because if you don't like it, play better. Penguins 4, Bruins nothing. That was your final score tonight. Thanks for the questions. Christian, good to meet you here tonight. Hunter, as always, good to see you. And Mike Osti contributing there to the conversation, adding something to it. Thanks to all of you who were the silent majority as well, just watching, just tuning in, whether you did it live or via the archive on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Like and subscribe, as they say here on YouTube. This is Matt Gajtka saying good night, God bless, and talk to you soon with more Penguins Postgame.